Okay, this will be part two of guided discussion number 6, which I'm really happy that I'm doing this online for you guys right now because in looking at how long this guided discussion was, it would probably take us 2 or 3 days to get done with it if I was in school. So I'm going to talk a little bit right now about some of the domestic issues at home during the 1950s and kind of leave us looking at some of the foreign policy stuff that we'll cover on Monday when I get back. But I want to start off by talking about the civil rights movement beginning during this time period. Very famous case involved a woman named Linda Brown, who was a 9-year-old in Topeka, Kansas, a little girl, not a woman yet. She attended an all-black elementary school across town. Her parents felt that Linda should be able to go to a white school that was closer to home. Now, um, they sued along with a bunch of other parents as well. I know Brown gets all the credit because her name was on the case, but this was actually combined with multiple cases that were of the same nature, and it was a case that was called Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, um, or Brown versus the Board of Education. The Supreme Court in this case outlawed racial segregation in public schools because it concluded that separating blacks from others generates a lasting feeling of inferiority, and essentially by doing this they reversed the Plessy versus Ferguson case that we talked about earlier. Um, a year later, the Supreme Court ordered that states desegregate their schools with all deliberate speed necessary. Southern states simply ignored the ruling, and by the end of 1956, in 6 southern states, not a single black child attended school with whites. Um, that, of course, changed over time. The Montgomery Bus Boycott from 1955 to 1956. This is the kind of the rise of Martin Luther King Jr. here. Rosa Parks on December 1st of 1955, she was a woman who was arrested because she refused to give up her seat to a white person. Um, she was riding the first row of the black section of the bus, but the white section was full, and so she was asked to give up her seat. She didn't, and in response to her being in trouble for this, black leaders led by Martin Luther King Jr. organized the Montgomery Bus Boycott from 1955 to 1956. During this boycott, blacks refused to ride the city buses, walking or carpooling to work instead. The hope was that the bus company would lose business and that would force them in the city to change its segregation laws. Late 1956, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation on local buses was illegal. Another important historical occurrence during this time period involving African Americans was in 1957, the confrontation in Little Rock with Orville Faubus. Orville Faubus, great name. In Little Rock, Arkansas, in 1957, the city quietly approved a plan to integrate its schools, and 9 black students were assigned to Little Rock Central High School, a school of some 2,000 white students. Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus caught wind of this, and on the first day of classes in 1957, he had the Arkansas National Guard surround the high school in order to keep the black students from entering the school. A mob of angry whites was also there to taunt the black students. A court order forced Faubus to withdraw the National Guard, but the angry mob remained and continued to block the 9 blacks from entering their school. In reaction, President Eisenhower ordered federal troops to maintain order in Little Rock and ensure that the integration of Little Rock's Central High School was carried out. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, whenever you see National Guardsmen being called by a governor who has authority over them, although the supreme authority rests with the president, and you have federal reserve troops coming in from the Army, that is usually a pretty good indicator of a potential for civil war. So this is a pretty crazy time. All right. Meanwhile, moving on from race here, The intellectuals of the 1950s. A number of intellectuals criticized the culture of the 1950s. The major criticism was that of conformity and materialism of the 1950s, as it was reinforced by television. The most famous economic critic of the time was John Kenneth Galbraith, who wrote The Affluent Society in 1958. The problem Galbraith wrote about in his book was that the failure of the wealthy Americans to address the need for increased social spending for the common good. If we were such an affluent nation, he said, why was there so much poverty? Why did we have slums and breathe the foul air when we had people who had the ability to change it? And so this book greatly influenced the likes of future Presidents Kennedy and Johnson in the 1960s. All right, I'm going to stop right there. This is part 2 of guide discussion number 6, and we'll pick up with part 3 briefly.